guys, my name's Alex. I am a junior and I'm a speech major from Buffalo. So being part of speech, I really enjoyed reading this week's readings. One of them by Bruce was about how we visualize literacy, and this was interesting to me because I want to talk about two things. So the first thing I want to talk about is something called emergent literacy skills. So there's 4 literacy skills that children must know before they can even begin to read. I'm not going to talk about all 4 because they don't all have to do with this, but one of them is called print awareness. So print awareness is having kids be able to know things like which way you hold a book, what exactly a word is, being able to see what a word is. Oh, and all these words together, they make a story, they make an essay, they make a paragraph, stuff like that, so they know what these things are. So they need to know, like, if they see a menu, it's listing food. If they see a book, it's a story. We have them make birthday cards, and that's how they know. Just kind of getting that whole awareness. So it's called print awareness. And ways we do this, it's all about being able to visualize all of these things so that they can know what they need to know before they can start to read each word. So we do this by having kids point to things in the room, like window. We can be like, oh, what's a window? We'll have them point to a window. This gets them to visualize it in their minds and be like, oh, what am I looking for? That's what I'm looking for. So we do there's a lot of different ways to test this, but this is something that they need before they can even begin to learn. So if this is necessary to begin to read, all is visualizing, knowing what it is, thinking of it in your mind before you can actually put it to use. If that's what you need to read, then it should be continued to worked on as a skill, not just obviously in that sense, at a more in-depth, greater sense, but definitely something that we can continue to work on even as we get older in our literacy and reading skills. So the next thing I want to talk about is one of the big questions in speech. Sorry, I keep talking about speech, but it's my major, so that's why I learn all these things. So one of the big questions is, as a speech pathologist, why should I care about literacy? Like, what does it have to do with speech? Well, the two things makes a good reader. 2 things kids need to be able to do to be able to read. One is word recognition, where speech pathologist comes in. The second is language comprehension. So language comprehension is understanding what other people say or write. So we do this a lot in our writing, and we read things, we answer questions. This is a big part of our literacy. Well, I think a lot of people kind of forget the whole what we hear, so we can still hear things and be able to visualize it and get on paper. That's why in the article it talks about how graphic organizers are really helpful for some students because they can visualize exactly how their essay is going to be planned out before they write it. Some people are just visual learners, and that's why it's important to really incorporate this kind of stuff in it. Not just that, when we hear these words, we think of things. So video presentations are very helpful. It works the same way to be able to understand. Even this class, these things you guys are listening to me speak, and you have to think of all these things and get it down on paper. You have to visualize the literacy, answer questions based on what you're hearing and not just what you're writing. That's why writing might not be important. We can even make a video to express what we're learning. It doesn't have to be writing. All these different ways. We keep kids interesting again. We've been learning a lot about, not just in this class, but a lot of my other education classes, how to keep kids involved, wanting to learn. So I think that a lot of those type of things we can do. So I want to show you a couple things. So other ways that we can do literacy. So this is actually something from my elementary school that we did. We read a story and then we had to draw it out, the important events. So if you look, this is actually like a little box, and if you grab it, you pull it all falls down, and this is actually the story of Humpty Dumpty. You can see that. So I thought this is cool. This is one example that you can do to really get kids to be able to visualize the story, listen to a story, write out the important events. One other thing I have is, I don't know if you guys really see this. This is called a story wheel. It's kind of, the lighting's a little weird. But, so basically what it is, it's just a wheel. It's got 6 different components in it, and the steps right here. So it says have someone read a story, or you can even have students read the story to other students so they can hear a new change of voice, get them involved. It could be any kind of story you as a teacher choose. And the students write down 6 big events. That's what these events are right here. There's 6 of them. There's 6 of them. And then they write the title in the middle, and then they color, and they make an illustration of each of the big events. So that's just one way that you guys can get students involved. And now I got a couple questions for you. So here are a couple of questions for you. First one is, have you done video assignments in your language or literacy classes? Next one is, if yes, what did you do? And if no, do you think it would have helped you? Last one is, what are some other ways to express literacy skills that don't include writing? So if you want to take a second to answer these questions, if you have any ideas, that'd be great.
Hello everyone. I've created a video segment that corresponds to multimodality in writing-based assignments. I have gathered a few different strategies that can be used within different content areas, as we've learned throughout this semester that it is not just English language arts classes that require a form of writing, whether it is formal or informal. It's important to explore various methods in instruction, as what may work for one student may not work for another. Everyone learns in their own way, and it is the educator's role to be able to provide a learning environment that encourages the students to think critically about the material that has been covered in class. Multimodal texts craft an environment by merging 2 different modes together, for example, audio and written language. Students can express themselves through various ways, just as how John in the article we read about the construction of Native identity in school chose to express his identity as a Native American by using dance as a medium. By their very nature, modes are embodied processes. Modes are used as we see here: touch, taste, smell, and experience. Why pay attention to multimodality as an educator? Assignments encourage students to garner information both new and already attained. However, it isn't always easy to turn thoughts and ideas into written responses. The implementation of multimodality makes it easier for students to communicate their ideas and findings because it creates various pathways for students to choose from, when they have to decide on how they are going to work on and complete their assignment. Students who struggle with writing-based assignments can benefit from multimodal assignments, as seen in Bruce's Visualizing Literacy article. Those students had mentioned that they struggled with writing assignments. The introduction of exploring the visual process of creating and editing a video led them to perform well on a literacy assignment. Subject areas and multimodal texts. While many of these multimodal texts can be effectively used under many subject areas, which ones do you think would be harder or easier to implement in? The examples are provided on the right. Also, even if some multimodal texts can be harder to use in certain subject areas, it doesn't take away the fact that a change in routine may be needed to gauge student interest or find a better way in having the students perform better on assignments that require writing skills. Alex really highlights this with how she brought up visual learners in the classroom setting. The 3 types of learning styles of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic all matter in the classroom, especially when working towards active student engagement. The different learning styles should all be taken into consideration when creating assignments. This works with multimodal texts because they blend different modes together. Even if one student doesn't feel inclined to complete an assignment on a book, perhaps they will have more intrinsic motivation rather than extrinsic when it involves something that pertains to their own learning style. This is also applicable towards inclusive classrooms in that the educator can differentiate instruction by using multimodality for assignments. If one student is struggling with creating an argument paper, then it can help the student if they create something like a mind map that at least is a stepping stone towards getting their ideas out there on paper. One thing that is useful is to have students visually organize their ideas. That way they will understand their train of thought and have time to see if their ideas are really connecting or not. Mind maps are relatable since it's a chart of ideas, and I'm sure that the majority of students have all had an experience that required them to create a list of sorts, whether it was for a class like a T-chart or a grocery list.
Hi, I'm Christina Kennedy. I'm in the graduate program for Social Studies Certification 7 through 12, and my day job is as a substitute teacher working in the North Towns in Buffalo. So one of the schools, the very first school that I ever subbed in, I subbed for a second grade class, and I subbed on a day when there was an assembly. I found out when I got to the assembly that the assembly was about Native American dance. So this school that I'm subbing in has between 8 and 15, I would guess, percent of their students are Native American students who live at a nearby reservation. And it was absolutely amazing to see how proud the students who were not only in my class, but the students that I saw on the stage who I didn't know were to share their culture and their history. They did dances, they shared songs, they shared the background, the historical background of the dances, and then they invited students on stage who were not Native American to join in and to learn the dances as well. And the excitement from those students was amazing. It was really phenomenal to be able to see a school encouraging that kind of collaboration. Because I'm in 514, I chose 2 articles to share with you today. The first is Reports from the Field, Native Youth Media as Social Justice Youth Development. And this article presents the case for doing a community-based youth media project. A group called Majeezy did a 10-week media project with Native American students, the first 3 weeks teaching them how to actually physically create a project, and the last 7 weeks guiding them through and working with them to create the project. What they found was that the students used oral traditions, place-based traditions, ceremonial traditions rooted in their culture, their Native American culture, to tell stories in a way that either preserved older traditions or combined older traditions with new ideas. And this is a really interesting way to encourage students to connect to their own culture. I really enjoyed this article, so I recommend reading it. It's fairly short. The second article that I chose was Embracing Intercultural Diversification, Teaching Young Adult Literature with Native American Themes. And this was a teacher who was interested in teaching a Native American ELA course. And what she did was she went through and she talked to the Native American community. She got feedback, and she spoke to her students to figure out exactly what they wanted to learn about. So she created this mock curriculum and then gave it to the students and said, well, what would you like to learn about? What tribes would you like to learn about? What kind of literature would you like to learn about? And what she found was that her Native American students wanted to learn more about their own tribe, and that her non-Native American students really didn't remember much or connect much to Native American culture before this class. They didn't know very much about the history. They didn't know very much about basic geographical, where are the tribes located, things like that. So what she did was, after consulting with Native American experts in the fields, the librarians, Native elders at the local tribes, local reservations, she chose from a couple of different literature options. And I'd just like everybody to pause this video for a second and turn to page 61 in this article. It's in the presentation materials, and just look at the book list of books used in the Native American literature culture curriculum here. Now, this is really interesting because there are so many different options on this page, and so many different things that could be considered. One of the most popular ones right now is the Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, and this is a relatively popular book that's used in ELA to talk about Native American themes, and it might be an option that you could use within your own classroom if you and your Native American community that you feel connected to and your administration feel like it's an appropriate book, because there are some themes in there that are a little controversial. but it's definitely something to think about. And she also talked about using Code Talker, which is about the true story and the instrumental role of Native Americans in World War II. The final part of my presentation is an interview that I had with the Native American educator at Akron, one of the Native American educators. He teaches Seneca language to the high school and middle school students, and I thought it was absolutely invaluable for us to speak to somebody who is from the community and who is teaching in the community when we're talking about Native American literacy, and I'm very thankful that he was able to speak to me, and I had a ton of great information, and I have about eight or 9 minutes of the interview after this, but I just wanted to touch on some quick points before I head on to that. There's one thing that we talk about, which is the history behind why Native American students may be less excited to be in school than non-Native students, and a piece of that is the boarding school experience that their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents went through. And I just want to make a point here. There's a movie that we talk about within the interview called Unseen Tears, and it's about the Native American boarding school experience within Western New York. So when you talk about hitting close to home, there's nothing that hits closer to home than that. So it's available on Amazon Prime for, I think, $2 or $3 to rent, and if you have an hour or two of time, that would be a really wonderful thing to look at. Otherwise, he has offered some awesome insight, and I'm just going to let him speak for himself. Go ahead and explain what you teach.
Yeah, my name is Scott Logan. I teach Seneca language here at Akron for the 7th grade, 8th grade. I also have 9th grade and 10th graders. Sometimes I have seniors, any high school kids that can't fit their language into their schedule, then I'll have them kind of, it's tough to overcome that, and that's a big part of, in all honesty, it's a big part of why I took this job, and was to be more of, a person. I mean, I would like to have seen more Native teachers when I was in school. Mm-hmm. It would have been a safe place to go to. It would have been a safe, you wouldn't have felt so, I guess, trapped. Like it's, you're in this institution that's, and a lot of people don't understand what it's like to be sometimes the only person of color in the room, or let alone, brown or whatever. And that's hard on a kid that's coming from the reservation. It's a very small community, and it's just different. Native people, our ideals are different, our ways of thinking are different. Even if they're not traditionals, they're still traditional ways of thinking, traditional ways of looking at the world. The way we view the world is totally different than mainstream society. So there's a lot of those things at play, and then there's the historical trauma of the boarding schools and
Can you explain a little bit about that?
And stuff like that. So the boarding schools, I'll talk to my classes about it, and I do have a video that I show. I don't know if you've seen Unseen Tears. Yeah, yes. I'll show that, and I'll tell the kids, you may not know it, but probably all of you in here within 3 generations are affected by boarding school. My grandmother went, my grandfather went. Actually, my grandmother didn't go. My grandfather went, and my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, she went to Carlisle for a little while, and then she ended up going to Thomas Indian School. So, I got it on both sides, and that's a lot of the reason why we're losing the language, is because they were, taught not to speak it. They were told not to. They were punished for doing it. So when they came home, my grandma would always tell me, I mean, she could understand it, but she didn't speak it that well, and she would say that a lot of times that her mother's generation, they would use the language when they didn't want the kids to know what they were talking about. And you really think about that, it's really sad. You're using your own language to, against your own kids. But that's, and their whole mentality was that, well, I don't want them to know it because they're going to go through what I went through. I had my knuckles smashed with a ruler. I had, or a book or something. My mouth taped shut. I remember, there's in the movie about, putting something on their tongue and whatever, you know, and washing their mouth out with hot sauce. I've heard so many different stories, you know, of things that they did, that, especially to prevent them from speaking, using their language. So, you know, when they got out, not only did they not have any real idea of a family unit anymore because they lived a militaristic style life in a bunkhouse, you know, institution, and they're really not family based anymore. You know, they're not family minded anymore. And they come out and, you know, okay, now what I have to do? Okay, now I'm supposed to have kids and I'm supposed to do this and I'm supposed to do that, like they tell me. But you know, for however long they were in there, they were told you can't do this and you can't do that, and you can't, you know, be proud of who you are basically, and you can't, you know, you have to forget about your culture and your ways, and now we're telling you what, you know, what this is all about. And it's never been the idea for us is once you leave, you know, to leave the reservation to go and get an education and then go somewheres and like never come back. The idea is, you know, because really traditionally, and that's another tough thing, people that are traditional, there's some of our teachings that that say school is wrong, that we're not supposed to be in school, that we're, you know, that's the whole idea is that it was the white man's thing, and that, you know, those books they put in front of you make you forget about who you are, basically is the idea, you know.
Yeah.
And so the kids have that also, which is from their parents, and then the parents have historical trauma where, I mean, I know growing up, oh, that school doesn't want you to progress. They don't want you to do any better. They don't want, you know, they don't want you to do good. They don't expect you to do good. They don't want, and that's been the whole idea. I mean, and if you look at history and what things that happen through history, that's kind of what it says. What, you know, Europeans, Americans have been, and once, you know, became American, is the idea is that you're no good. We don't want you around. We're trying to get rid of you. Everything that has happened between us and whether it was the Dutch, the French, you know, the British, whoever came over, it was the same thing. It was the same, you know, you're not good enough, and it was always, you know, you are our children, we're your father, and, you know, our people were like, we're brothers, we're the same. We're not, you know, that's an authority figure. That's, you know, you're looking down on us, kind of. That means you can reprimand us anytime you want and whatever, you know, like you do your kids. But that's always been the idea, you know, that whole idea is that they're the fathers and we're the children, and it's still, you know, and it's still, you can see that through history, you know. So it's tough for these kids, and because you got grandparents and parents still with that idea, because it may not be a government really run institution, but it's still viewed as a boarding school. It still has that
Right.
air of, so a lot of times the kids come here and they're like, this place is against me. They come here with the idea that, and I was one of them, you know, in high school. We all had the same thing. It was, and it was a lot easier to have that idea then because there were teachers that were, I mean, so I had a teacher and, you know, a social studies teacher. We're seventh grade. We were learning about the Iroquois and everything's, they used to do this and they used to live here and they used to, and everything is used to. And I'm sitting there with two other Seneca kids in my class, and, you know, thinking, and at this point in your life as a teenager, especially at that age, you're like, you just take it for what it is. You hear it and you're like, yeah, I know. All the history books say used to. But I'm here, so I don't know, you know, I don't know what you want. And so then we were out for ceremonies, and we had ceremonies and we were out for them, which a school is really good about now. You know, they let the kids be out and give them time to make stuff up. But we went and told him, you know, we missed work and we weren't here. We were at ceremonies, and he said, no, you weren't. You people don't do that anymore. You don't do that anymore. Get out of here. You're lying. You don't do that. And we're right in the middle of it. You know, we were right in the middle of it. The hotbed area. I mean, you know, the canal and the St. Lawrence Seaway, everything coming down. Everyone came in that way and came down. You know, that's why Buffalo was so huge and Rochester was so important back in the early years, because of the waterway. And that was our waterway too. At the same time, we used it also. So, you know, I mean, the trails that we used are the Thruway today, Route 104. Those were trails that my ancestors used as main trails to walk to different communities and reservations and different, well, not even reservations, different people, you know, villages at the time. So, you know, and we're right in the middle of all that. A lot of that, especially back in those days. And there's so much involvement just within the formation of the United States in this area with the Haudenosaunee. I mean, that's a whole another aspect of what I teach in here too, and I let them know. You know, there's so many things taken for democracy. I mean, I have relatives that met with George Washington and Ben Franklin, Thomas, to discuss how we did things so that they could use that to 50 states is the same thing as we have 5 nations, original nations. Each nation didn't tell the other one what they're doing is wrong, but we all believe the same thing. With a central nation that wasn't greater than any other nation, but was more of just a central location to meet at, which is basically 50 states, Washington, D.C. Each state has its own set of laws and beliefs, but yet they all followed the same one. It was the same thing. And we were implementing it when they came over, you know, when all the settlers, and they saw that and they thought, hey, they can do it, we can do it. So that's where democracy came from. Yeah, so there's a lot in the, you know, and I try and teach all that too to the kids. So it gives them a bit of a, after they get over the, well, they steal it from us, then they get into the, you know, well, it's cool that, you know, my ancestors are involved in that. That's a big thing. It's, you know, something to be proud of. And it gives them something, you know, maybe they can carry themselves up a little more when they walk around and, you know,